The Wyoming wind howled like a wounded animal as Gideon Walsh rode through the worst blizzard he had seen in his 32 years. And through the whiteout, he spotted something dark and moving that turned out to be a woman stumbling through snowdrifts that reached her knees. He spurred his horse forward, his breath forming ice crystals on his beard, and when he got close enough to see her face, he realized she was barely conscious, her lips blue and her whole body convulsing with shivers that looked violent enough to break bones. Without a word, he dismounted and caught her just as her legs gave out completely, and she felt like a block of ice in his arms as he lifted her onto his horse and climbed up behind her, wrapping his heavy coat around them both. "Stay with me," he said against her ear, though he was not sure she could even hear him over the roaring wind. Her teeth chattered so hard he could hear them clicking together, and her eyes kept rolling back in her head, like she was trying to slip away into sleep that would turn permanent in this cold. He kicked his horse into motion, knowing the old line shack was only half a mile ahead if he had his bearings right, and he held the woman tighter against his chest to share what warmth he had left. The shack appeared like a ghost through the snow, and Gideon had never been so grateful to see that weathered structure in his life. He half carried, half dragged the woman inside, kicking the door shut behind them to block out the screaming wind. She collapsed onto the floor, still shaking so violently that her whole body jerked and spasmed, and he knew he had to work fast, or she would not make it through the night. He had fire supplies stashed in the shack from previous stays, and his frozen fingers fumbled with matches as he built up kindling in the small fireplace. The first match broke, the second blew out, but the third caught and held, and within minutes he had flames licking up through the dry wood he fed them. The woman lay curled on her side, her wet clothes clinging to her like a second skin, and Gideon knew those had to come off or the cold would keep pulling the life right out of her. "I need to get you out of these wet things," he said, though she seemed beyond hearing or caring. He found the wool blankets he kept stored in a trunk and turned his back to give her what privacy he could while he stripped off her soaked dress, petticoats, and undergarments, replacing them with the dry blankets wrapped tight around her body. Her skin was mottled white and purple, and her fingers looked waxy and stiff. He rubbed her hands between his own, trying to bring feeling back into them, then did the same with her feet, working steadily while the fire grew stronger and started to push warmth into the small space. Her shaking began to ease after what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, and her breathing evened out into something that sounded less desperate. Gideon kept the fire fed and sat beside her, watching the color slowly return to her face. She was younger than he had first thought, maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair that had come loose from its pins and lay in damp tangles around her shoulders. Even half frozen and barely conscious, he could see she was beautiful in a way that made his chest feel tight. When her eyes finally opened, they were the color of creek water in summer, a clear greenish brown that fixed on his face with confusion and fear. "You are safe," he said quietly. "You were caught in the blizzard. I brought you to a line shack to warm up." She tried to speak, but her throat seemed to work against her, producing only a croaking sound. He reached for his canteen and held it to her lips, letting her take small sips of water. She coughed, then tried again. "Where?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "About 15 miles north of Laramie, Wyoming, near the Medicine Bow Range. Do you remember how you got out in the storm?" Her eyes filled with tears that spilled over and tracked down her temples into her hair. "The wagon. It overturned. My family." Gideon felt his stomach drop. "How many were with you?" "My brother and his wife. We were traveling to their new homestead." She closed her eyes, and more tears came. "The wagon tipped when we hit something in the snow. I got thrown clear. I called for them, but I could not see anything, could not find them. I just kept walking, thought maybe I could find help. When did this happen? This morning, I think. Or maybe yesterday. I do not know any more. Gideon looked toward the window where snow still battered against the glass. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and visibility was near zero. I will go look for them as soon as the weather breaks. Right now, nobody could survive out there, and we need to keep you warm and safe. They could be hurt. They could be dying. And you would have died for certain if I had not found you. We have to wait for the storm to pass. I promise I will search as soon as I can. She turned her face away from him, fresh sobs shaking her shoulders. Gideon felt helpless in the face of her grief. So he did the only thing he could think of, and kept the fire burning hot and bright, heating water in a small pot he found so she could have something warm to drink. He added coffee grounds and a little sugar, and when he pressed the tin cup into her hands, she accepted it with a murmured thanks. "What is your name?" he asked after a while. "Olivia. Olivia Barrett." She looked at him properly for the first time. "Thank you for saving my life." "I know I would be dead without you." Gideon Walsh. "I work cattle for the Triple Bar Ranch, checking fence lines and watching for predators. This is one of the lined shacks we use during winter pasture season." He poured himself coffee and sat down on the floor near her. "Were you and your family traveling far?" "From Pennsylvania." "Thomas, my brother, he received a land grant from the Homestead Act, 160 acres near the Laramie Plains. He and Martha were so excited about starting fresh, building something of their own." Her voice broke. "This was supposed to be a new beginning." "How old are you, if you do not mind me asking?" 23. "Thomas is 30, or he was, I do not know." She started to cry again, and Gideon moved closer, putting an awkward hand on her blanket-wrapped shoulder. She turned into the touch like a child seeking comfort, and before he quite knew what was happening, she was sobbing against his chest while he held her and made soothing sounds. The storm raged through the night and into the next day. Gideon used his time to make the shack more comfortable, hanging a rope line to dry Olivia's clothes near the fire, rationing out the beans and hardtack he had in his supplies to make meals for them both, and keeping the fire fed from the woodpile stacked outside the door. Olivia slept in fits and starts, sometimes crying out in her dreams, other times lying so still he had to check that she was still breathing. When she was awake, they talked in the quiet way of people trapped together by circumstance. She told him about growing up in Pittsburgh, where her father had worked in a steel mill until he died of lung fever, about her mother passing 2 years later from heartbreak and pneumonia, about Thomas being the only family she had left. Gideon told her about his own childhood on a hardscrabble farm in Missouri, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 16, about working his way west through odd jobs until he found himself good at ranch work and settled into it. "You have a wife waiting for you somewhere?" Olivia asked on the second day when the wind had finally died down to a dull roar instead of a shriek. "No wife. Never found a woman who wanted to tie herself to a ranch hand who spends half his time alone in shacks like this one." He smiled, but it felt sad around the edges. "What about you?" "No husband traveling with you. I was engaged once back in Pittsburgh. He worked in the mill with my father, but he died in an accident there, crushed under falling steel." She pulled the blanket tighter. "That was 3 years ago. Thomas wanted me to come west with them for a fresh start, to get away from all the sadness. Seems like sadness followed you here. It does feel that way." On the third day, the storm broke just after dawn, leaving behind a world transformed into white silence. The sun emerged pale and cold, turning the landscape into something that looked like sugar frosting, beautiful and deadly. Gideon prepared to go search for the overturned wagon. "I am coming with you," Olivia said, already reaching for her dried clothes. "You are still recovering from near freezing. It is better if you stay here where it is warm. They are my family. I need to know." Her jaw set in a way that told him arguing would be pointless. He saddled his horse and helped Olivia up behind him, then followed her directions to where she thought the accident had happened. The snow was deep enough that the horse struggled in places, but they made slow progress across the white expanse. Olivia kept pointing and correcting their course, trying to remember landmarks that were now hidden under snow. They found the wagon 2 hours into their search. It lay on its side in a shallow ravine, half buried in a drift. The 2 horses that had been pulling it were dead in their traces, frozen solid. Gideon dismounted and approached carefully, his heart heavy with what he expected to find. Thomas Barrett was still in the driver's seat, or what remained of it, frozen in a position that suggested he had been trying to climb out when he died. His wife Martha was a few feet away, partially covered by snow, her hand stretched out toward her husband as though she had been trying to reach him. Both had clearly been dead since the day of the accident, 3 days ago now. Olivia made a sound like all the air had been punched out of her lungs. Gideon caught her before she could stumble forward and held her while she wailed her grief into the cold morning air. When she finally quieted into hiccuping sobs, he spoke gently. "The ground is frozen too hard to bury them properly right now. But I know a place in Laramie, a church with a good pastor who will help. We can bring them there, and when spring comes they can have a proper burial. We cannot just leave them here. We will not, I promise, but we need help to get them out and transported safely. Let me take you back to the shack, then I will ride to Laramie for help." She nodded against his shoulder, and he guided her back to his horse. The ride to the shack passed in silence, and when they arrived, Olivia went immediately to curl up near the fire, staring into the flames with empty eyes. Gideon rode hard for Laramie, arriving in town by late afternoon. He went straight to the church and found Pastor Reynolds, who agreed to help without hesitation. Together with 2 men from the congregation, they returned to the ravine with a wagon the next morning. The work of freeing the bodies and loading them was grim and difficult, but they managed it with respect and care. Thomas and Martha Barrett were laid to rest in the church cellar to wait for spring burial. When Gideon returned to the line shack, it was nearly dark. He found Olivia sitting exactly where he had left her, though the fire had burned low. He built it back up and made them both food, but she only picked at hers. "They are safe now," he told her. "The pastor will make sure they have a proper service when the ground thaws. What do I do now?" Her voice was hollow. "I have no family left, no money for train fare back east, even if I wanted to go back. Thomas had all our money with him for the land payment." Gideon had been thinking about this very question during his ride. "You could stay in Laramie. There are families who need help with children or housework, or you could work at one of the hotels or restaurants. I do not know anyone there. I do not know anyone anywhere. You know me." She looked up at him, and something flickered in her eyes that had not been there before. "I do know you. You saved my life, Gideon Walsh. I suppose that creates a bond." "It does." He hesitated, then pushed forward with the idea that had been growing in his mind. "I have a proposal for you if you will hear it. Not a marriage proposal, not yet, though maybe someday if we find we suit each other. But I am tired of living alone in shacks and bunkhouses. I have been saving my pay for years, and I have enough to buy land and start building a real home. A ranch of my own, small at first, but something solid. I could use a partner in that enterprise, someone to help make it a home instead of just a place to sleep. If you wanted to stay, to give it a try, I would make sure you had your own space and your say in how things go. No pressure, no expectations beyond honest work and honest companionship." "What do you think?" Olivia studied his face for a long moment. "Why would you offer this to a stranger? Because you are not really a stranger anymore. Because I see someone brave enough to walk through a blizzard trying to save her family. Someone strong enough to survive what would have killed most people. Because I think maybe we both deserve a chance at that fresh start you came west looking for." He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling heat rise to his face. "And because I have been alone a long time and I am tired of it. If I am honest, you are the first person in years who has made me think about building something permanent. We barely know each other. Then we will take time to know each other better. No rush. Just two people helping each other through hard times and seeing where it leads." She was quiet for so long he thought she would refuse. Then she nodded just once. "All right, I will try it. But I need you to understand that I am grieving, and I do not know when that will ease. I cannot promise to be good company or a cheerful companion. I am not asking for that. I am just asking for a chance. Then you have it." They stayed at the line shack for another week, while Gideon completed his work checking the fence lines and making notes for the ranch foreman. During that time, they fell into an easy rhythm of shared tasks. Olivia cooked what little food they had into meals that tasted better than anything Gideon had made himself. He taught her how to repair leather tack and showed her the basics of what he did for the ranch. In the evenings they talked, sharing stories from their pasts, learning each other's habits and preferences. Gideon found himself watching her when she was not looking, noticing the way firelight caught gold strands in her dark hair, the way her hands moved with quick efficiency through whatever task she took on, the rare times when she smiled and it lit up her whole face. He was falling for her, he realized with some surprise. Not just attracted to her beauty, though she was beautiful, but drawn to her strength and the quiet dignity with which she carried her grief. When they finally returned to the Triple Bar Ranch, Gideon went straight to his boss, Samuel Henderson, and gave his notice. Samuel was sorry to lose a good worker, but understood Gideon's desire to start his own place. He even helped by pointing out a quarter section of land that had come available near the Laramie River. Good grazing with water access, and a small grove of cottonwoods that would provide building material. Gideon used nearly all his savings to file claim on the land. Then he and Olivia moved into a tent on the property and began the hard work of building their home. He hired 2 men from Laramie to help with the heavy construction work, and together they raised walls of cottonwood logs chinked with mud and grass. Olivia worked alongside them, hauling stones for the fireplace, cutting sod for the roof, making meals over a campfire that sustained them through long days of labor. The house took shape slowly through the remainder of winter and into early spring. It was not large, just 2 rooms with a fireplace and a sleeping loft, but it was solid and tight against the weather. Gideon built furniture from rough lumber, a table and chairs, a bed frame, shelves for storage. Olivia sewed curtains from fabric she bought in town, and made quilts from scraps she collected from the other ranch wives who had begun to stop by with welcomes and curiosity about the young woman living on Gideon Walsh's claim. They maintained separate sleeping arrangements, Gideon in the loft and Olivia in the main room where it stayed warmer. They were careful to be respectful of each other's space and privacy. But as the weeks passed, Gideon found it harder to ignore the way his heart kicked up whenever Olivia smiled at him, the way his day felt incomplete until they sat together in the evening reviewing the progress they had made. One night in late March, after they had moved into the completed house, Olivia asked him about his long-term plans for the ranch. I want to run cattle, maybe 200 head to start, he said. Build up the herd slowly. Sell beef to the army forts and the mining camps. In a few years, if things go well, I could double the herd size and hire on some help. Maybe breed horses too, good working stock that other ranchers would want to buy. That sounds like a solid plan. What about a family? Do you want children someday? The question caught him off guard. I always thought I would like children, but I figured that ship had sailed when I reached 30 without finding a wife. Why do you ask? Olivia looked down at her hands. Because I have been thinking about this arrangement between us, and I realize I do not want it to stay just an arrangement forever. You have been nothing but kind and honorable with me, Gideon. You gave me hope when I had none, and you have worked so hard to build something we can both be proud of. I think I would like to make this partnership something more permanent if you are willing. His heart hammered in his chest. Are you saying what I think you are saying? I am saying I would like to be your wife for real, not just a partner in a business arrangement. I am saying that somewhere along the way I started to fall in love with you, and I think maybe you feel the same way about me. Gideon moved around the table and knelt beside her chair. I feel exactly the same way. I have been half in love with you since that first night in the line shack, watching you be so brave even when you were terrified. Olivia Barrett, would you do me the honor of marrying me? Yes, she said, and then she was in his arms and he was kissing her, soft at first and then deeper when she responded with matching passion. They held each other for a long time, and Gideon felt something settle in his chest that he had not even known was restless. They were married 3 weeks later in the Laramie church, with Pastor Reynolds performing the ceremony. Most of the neighboring ranchers and their wives attended, along with some of the townsfolk who had gotten to know them. Olivia wore a simple blue dress she had made herself, and Gideon wore his best shirt and jacket. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Gideon kissed her in front of everyone and did not care who saw the tears in his eyes. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, both of them nervous despite having lived together for months. Gideon was careful and patient, wanting to make sure Olivia felt cherished and safe. She responded with a passion that surprised them both, and afterward they lay tangled together in the bed talking and laughing until dawn light crept through the windows. The next few years passed in a blur of hard work and steady progress. Gideon bought 20 head of cattle to start his herd, then 40 more the following year. He and Olivia worked from dawn until dark, mending fences, tending animals, growing a kitchen garden that produced vegetables through the summer and fall. In the winter, they stayed close to the fire, planning for the year ahead and enjoying the quiet companionship of their marriage. Olivia made good friends with some of the neighboring ranch wives, particularly Sarah Henderson, the boss of the Triple Bar Ranch's wife. Sarah had 3 young daughters and appreciated having another woman nearby to visit with. Through Sarah, Olivia learned more about ranching life and picked up skills like butter churning and cheese making that added to their household economy. On the anniversary of Thomas and Martha's death, they went to the church cemetery and stood at the graves that had been properly prepared once the ground thawed. Olivia cried, but not with the wrenching sobs of fresh grief. These were quieter tears, the kind that came with accepting a loss that would never fully heal but no longer felt unbearable. "You think they would be happy about us?" she asked Gideon as they walked back to their wagon. "I think they would be glad you survived and found happiness." "That is what people who love us want, is it not?" "I suppose it is. I just wish they could have seen the ranch, could have known you. Thomas would have liked you. And I would have liked him. But I promise you, Olivia, I will honor their memory by making sure you are always taken care of. That is something I can do for them." She squeezed his hand. "You already do that every single day." In the spring of their 3rd year of marriage, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. She told Gideon one morning at breakfast, simply and without fanfare, and watched his face transform from surprise to joy so pure it made her heart ache. "Are you sure?" he asked, coming around to kneel beside her chair just like he had when he proposed. "As sure as I can be. I have missed my courses for 2 months, and I have been sick every morning. Sarah says those are the signs." He put his hand on her still flat belly. "A baby! We are going to have a baby. Are you happy about it?" "Happy does not even begin to cover what I am feeling right now." He kissed her, then rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you. Thank you for giving me this life, this family." "You gave it to me first," she reminded him. "You saved my life and then gave me a reason to live it." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and summer. Gideon became almost comically protective, refusing to let Olivia do any heavy work and fretting whenever she felt tired. She tolerated his hovering with good humor, knowing it came from love, and the fact that he had already lost so many people in his life. In October, when the aspens on the mountain slopes turned gold and the air carried the first real bite of coming winter, Olivia went into labor. Sarah Henderson came to help, along with a midwife from town named Mrs. Chen, who had delivered half the babies in the county. Gideon was banished to the barn where he paced and worried until Sarah finally came out 12 hours later to tell him he had a healthy son. He rushed inside to find Olivia propped up in bed, exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the quilts she had made. The baby had a cap of dark hair and was making small, mewing sounds that seemed impossibly loud for something so small. "Meet your son," Olivia said softly. "I thought we could name him Thomas, after my brother, if that is all right with you." Gideon could barely speak around the lump in his throat. "Thomas Walsh. It is perfect." He sat on the edge of the bed and carefully took the baby, marveling at how light he was, how fragile. "Hello, Thomas. I am your father, and I promise I am going to do everything I can to give you a good life." The baby opened unfocused eyes and seemed to look right at him, and Gideon fell in love all over again. Being parents changed everything and nothing all at once. The work still had to be done. Cattle still needed tending, but now there was a baby who needed constant care and attention. They took turns with night feedings, Olivia nursing while Gideon changed diapers and walked the floor when Thomas was fussy. The house was messier than it had ever been, filled with baby clothes and blankets and the sweet milky smell of infancy. Gideon had never been happier in his life. Thomas thrived, growing plump and cheerful. By his first birthday he was walking and getting into everything, and Olivia was pregnant again. This time they had a daughter, Grace, born on a warm May afternoon when wildflowers covered the meadow behind their house. She had Olivia's eyes and Gideon's stubborn chin, and she screamed like a wounded mountain lion whenever she was hungry or tired or just felt like making noise. "2 children," Gideon said one night when they had finally gotten both babies to sleep and collapsed into bed themselves. "We have 2 children and a ranch that is actually turning a profit. Remember when we were huddled in that lined shack wondering if we would survive the night? I remember. It feels like a lifetime ago." Olivia curled into his side. "Do you ever regret taking in a half-frozen stranger?" "Not for one single second. Best decision I ever made." He kissed the top of her head. "Though I should probably thank that blizzard for blowing you into my life. I prefer to think of it as fate. We were meant to find each other. I can live with that explanation." The years continued to roll past, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and family. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved helping his father with the cattle and could ride a horse almost before he could run. Grace was her brother's opposite, wild and laughing. constantly bringing home injured animals she insisted they had to save. After Grace came another son, Matthew, and then 2 years later twin girls they named Rose and Ruby, who kept Olivia on her toes from the moment they learned to crawl in opposite directions simultaneously. The ranch expanded along with their family. Gideon bought adjacent land when it became available, increasing their acreage to nearly 400 acres. The cattle herd grew to 300 head, and he developed a reputation for raising quality beef that commanded premium prices. He hired 2 steady hands to help with the work, young men who lived in a bunkhouse he built near the barn. Olivia ran the household with capable efficiency, managing 5 children, a large garden, chickens, and all the cooking and sewing that kept a ranch family functioning. She also kept the ranch books, tracking expenses and income with meticulous care that ensured they stayed profitable even in lean years. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Gideon surprised Olivia with a gift he had been planning for months. He took her out to the Cottonwood Grove, where they had first camped when they claimed the land, and showed her the foundation he had laid for a new, larger house. "We have outgrown the original cabin," he said, watching her face. "I thought it was time we built something bigger, with real bedrooms for all the children and maybe a parlor where you can have your friends over without everyone sitting on top of each other. What do you think?" Olivia walked the perimeter of the foundation, her hand trailing along the stones. "How long have you been planning this?" "About a year. I have been setting aside money and gathering materials. I wanted to surprise you." She turned to face him, and he was alarmed to see tears on her cheeks. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked. "No, you wonderful man. These are happy tears. I cannot believe you did this for us, for me." She came to him and wrapped her arms around his waist. 10 years ago, I was dying in a blizzard with no hope and no future. Now I have you, our children, this beautiful life we have built together. Sometimes it feels like too much happiness, like I do not deserve it all. You deserve every bit of it and more. You are the strongest person I know, Olivia. You survived things that would have broken most people, and you turned that survival into something beautiful. He tilted her chin up to look into her eyes. "I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is my promise to you. I love you too. So much it scares me sometimes." They built the new house over the following year, this time with help from their neighbors who came for a barn raising that turned into a house raising. The structure was 2 stories with 6 bedrooms, a proper kitchen with a cast iron stove Gideon had freighted in from Cheyenne, and a parlor with large windows that let in southern light. Olivia cried again when they moved in, and she saw how Gideon had built window seats where she could sit and sew or read, how he had included a small room off the kitchen that could serve as her office for managing the ranch accounts. Thomas was 12 by then, old enough to take on real ranch work, and he spent most of his time working alongside his father. They were close in a way that made Olivia's heart full, the boy clearly worshiping his father and Gideon patient in teaching him everything he knew. Grace at 10 was already talking about becoming a veterinarian, though Olivia was not sure how that would work for a girl in Wyoming in the 1880s. Matthew was 8 and still figuring out who he was, caught between his older siblings' strong personalities. The twins were 6 and inseparable, doing everything together in perfect synchronization that was both adorable and occasionally maddening. Life was full and chaotic and exhausting and perfect. One evening when the children were all in bed, Gideon and Olivia sat together on the front porch of their new house watching the sun set over the mountains. He had his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him with the comfortable ease of long familiarity. "Do you remember what you told me in the line shack?" she asked. About wanting a partner to help make a house into a home, I remember. I think we did that. This feels like a home in every sense of the word. It does, and it is all because of you. I built the walls, but you made it a place worth coming back to. We did it together, she corrected. That is what makes it special. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. A coyote called from somewhere in the hills, and the cattle settled down for the night with low murmurs that carried on the still air. What do you think our lives would have been like if that blizzard had never happened? Olivia wondered aloud. If Thomas and Martha had made it to their homestead safely, I do not know. I suppose you would have helped them build their ranch, maybe met some local man and married him. I would probably still be working as a ranch hand, living in bunkhouses and saving money I had no real reason to spend. So we would have missed each other entirely. Most likely, which is a terrible thought. It is. I cannot imagine my life without you now. You and the children, this ranch, it is everything to me. Gideon pulled her closer. I know what you mean. Sometimes I think about that day I was riding through the blizzard. I almost did not go in the direction I did. I was thinking about heading back to the main ranch because the weather was getting so bad. But something made me keep going, and there you were. Divine intervention, Olivia said with a small smile. Maybe. Or maybe just incredible luck. Either way, I will be grateful for it every day for the rest of my life. When their children grew older, both Thomas and Grace showed an interest in taking over the ranch operation. This was unusual, as most ranches passed to sons alone, but Gideon had always treated his daughters the same as his sons when it came to ranch work. Grace had a natural gift with animals and a head for business that reminded him of Olivia. Thomas had the physical strength and endurance for the hard labor, but Grace's strategic thinking balanced his more impulsive nature. What if we made them partners? Olivia suggested one night when they were discussing the future. Equal shares to both of them, and they can run it together. That is exactly what I was thinking. They work well as a team, and it seems only fair given how much Grace has contributed over the years. The neighbors will talk. Let them talk. Our family does things our own way. When Thomas turned 20 and Grace 18, Gideon sat them both down and explained his plan to begin transitioning the ranch operation to them over the next few years. Both children were stunned and grateful, though Grace seemed near tears. "Are you sure, Papa?" she asked. "I know most ranchers would never consider giving a daughter equal ownership. I am completely sure. You have earned it, Grace. You work as hard as any man and twice as smart as most of them. This ranch will be in good hands with you and Thomas running it together." The transition happened gradually over the next 5 years. Gideon taught his children everything he knew about ranching, introducing them to buyers and bankers, showing them how to judge cattle and horse flesh, walking them through lean years and good ones so they could see how to manage both. Matthew decided ranch life was not for him and went to Denver to work in a bank, which surprised everyone, but turned out to suit his careful, detail-oriented personality. The twins both married young, Rose to a doctor in Laramie and Ruby to a railroad engineer, and both settled in town where they could be near each other. By the time Gideon was 55, Thomas and Grace were fully running the Walsh Ranch, which had grown to over 1,000 acres and 500 head of cattle. They had expanded into horse breeding just as Gideon had once imagined, and their stock was sought after throughout Wyoming and Montana. The ranch employed 8 full-time hands plus seasonal help during roundup and drive times. Gideon and Olivia moved into a smaller house they built near the creek, leaving the main house to Thomas and his wife Elizabeth and their growing family. Grace lived in town with her husband Robert, a veterinarian she had met when he came to treat a horse with colic, but she rode out to the ranch every day to work alongside her brother. Retirement suited Gideon and Olivia. They spent their days puttering in a garden, riding out to check on various parts of the ranch just for pleasure rather than necessity, and spoiling their growing collection of grandchildren. Thomas and Elizabeth had 4 children. Grace and Robert had 3. Matthew sent his 2 children to visit every summer from Denver. The twins had 1 child each so far, with promises of more to come. On a cool evening in September of 1897, Gideon and Olivia celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner in their small house. The years had been kind to them in most ways. Both had gray in their hair and lines around their eyes, but they were healthy and active, still able to do a full day's work when needed. 27 years, Olivia said, raising her glass of wine. Who would have thought we would make it this far? I did, Gideon said firmly. From the moment you said yes to marrying me, I knew we would go the distance. You were more confident than I was. I was so scared that first year, afraid I would fail you somehow or that you would regret taking me in. I never regretted it for 1 second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Olivia Walsh. And you are mine. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You loved me when I thought I would never feel anything but grief again. They clinked glasses and drank, then Gideon stood and offered his hand. Dance with me. There is no music. We do not need music. We never did. She took his hand and let him pull her close, and they swayed together in the lamplight, moving to a rhythm only they could hear. This was what happiness looked like, Olivia thought. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but quiet evenings with the person you loved, decades of partnership and trust built one day at a time. What do you think about when you look back on our life together? Gideon asked against her hair. I think about that lined shack and how terrified I was. I think about you building the fire and saving my life. I think about every house we have built, every child we have raised, every challenge we have faced together. And I think about how grateful I am that you rode through that blizzard and found me. I think about those things too, but mostly I just think about how much I love you and how lucky I am that you chose to stay. They danced until the fire burned low, and then they went to bed in each other's arms, still in love after all these years, still grateful for the life they had built from the ashes of tragedy and the warmth of a fire lit on the worst night of their lives. Years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of seasons and generations. Thomas and Elizabeth took over the main house completely, making it the center of Walsh Ranch operations. They modernized where it made sense, bringing in new breeds of cattle and experimenting with different grasses for pasture improvement. Grace's veterinary knowledge proved invaluable, and she developed a side business treating animals for other ranches in the region, making the Walsh name even more prominent. Gideon and Olivia settled deeper into their role as the family elders. Every Sunday, the entire Walsh clan gathered for dinner at the main house, a tradition that sometimes included 20 or more people between children, grandchildren, spouses, and ranch hands who had become like family. Olivia coordinated these meals with Elizabeth and Grace, and the women produced feasts that became legendary in the valley. On one such Sunday in the spring of 1902, when Gideon was 61 and Olivia 57, they gathered the entire family in the parlor after the meal. Gideon stood by the fireplace, the same one he had helped build with his own hands decades earlier, and looked at the sea of faces before him. His children, grown and capable. Their spouses, good people who had joined the family. 14 grandchildren ranging from babes in arms to teenagers nearly grown. This was his legacy, He thought with satisfaction. Not just the land or the cattle, but these people, this family. "Your mother and I wanted to talk to all of you together," he began, and the room quieted. "We are getting older, and while we are both healthy now, we know that will not always be true. We wanted you all to understand how the ranch will pass down when we are gone." "Papa, do not talk about that," Grace interrupted, but he held up a hand. "It is important, honey. Listen." He continued, "The bulk of the ranch will go to Thomas and Grace as equal partners, as we have always planned. But we have also set aside money and property for each of you others. Matthew, there is a fund that will come to you for your children's education. Rose and Ruby, you each have inheritances that will provide security for your families. And for all the grandchildren, we have established trust funds that will help them get started in whatever life they choose, whether that is ranching or something else entirely." Olivia stepped up beside him. "We wanted you to know this now, while we are here to explain our thinking. We built this ranch from nothing, your father and I. We survived a blizzard and loss and hardship that could have destroyed us. Instead, it made us stronger, and it made this family possible. We want you all to know how proud we are of each of you, and how much we love you." There was not a dry eye in the room. The children and grandchildren came forward to embrace them, and the evening dissolved into reminiscence and storytelling, tales from the early days when the ranch was just a tent and a dream. That night, lying in bed, Olivia said, "I am glad we told them. It feels good to have everything settled and clear. It does, though I plan to be around to annoy them all for many more years. I am counting on it. We have grandbabies to spoil and grandchildren to teach. You cannot leave me to do all that alone. I would not dream of it." They kept that promise for another decade. Gideon and Olivia remained active and engaged with the ranch and family well into their 70s. They were a common sight around the property, walking hand in hand, inspecting cattle with experienced eyes, sitting on the porch of their small house watching the sun set over mountains they had called home for more than 40 years. In the spring of 1912, when wildflowers again carpeted the meadow behind the original cabin where they had first started their life together, Gideon took Olivia out for a ride. They went to the line shack where he had saved her life all those years ago. It was still standing, though barely, weathered and leaning but stubbornly refusing to fall. "Remember this place?" he asked. "How could I forget? This is where my new life began." They dismounted and went inside. The fireplace was still there and the old trunk where he had kept supplies. Gideon found some dry wood and, just as he had done 42 years earlier, built a fire. When it was crackling cheerfully, he sat down beside Olivia on the floor, their backs against the wall just as they had sat so long ago. "I wanted to come back here with you," he said, "to remember where we started. It was the worst day of my life and the best day all at once. I lost my family, but I found you. I found you too, and I would do it all again, exactly the same way, just to end up here with you." Olivia leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever regret not having more time together? We were both older when we met. We missed all those young years." "I do not regret a single thing. We have had 42 years together, and they have been the best years of my life. Besides, I think we needed to live through what we did before we met. It made us who we are, made us ready for each other." That is a good way to think about it. They sat by the fire until it burned down to embers, then rode home slowly, savoring the spring sunshine and the familiar landscape of the ranch they had built together. When they reached their house, both of their children were waiting for them with worried expressions. "Where were you?" Thomas demanded. "We have been looking everywhere." "We took a ride out to the old line shack," Gideon said. "Wanted to show your mother where it all began. You should have told someone where you were going. What if something had happened? We are not invalids yet, son. We can still take a ride without supervision. But Thomas was right that they were slowing down. Gideon's joints ached more than they used to, especially in cold weather. Olivia tired more easily and had developed a cough that worried Grace. They were getting old. There was no denying it. In the fall of that year, Olivia became seriously ill with pneumonia. Despite Grace calling in doctors from Laramie and Cheyenne, she lingered for 3 weeks before rallying. The illness left her weakened, though, and she never fully recovered her strength. Gideon tended to her with devoted care, just as he had tended to her in that lined shack so long ago. "You saved me once," she said one afternoon when he brought her tea and fresh bread. "Now you are saving me again." "As many times as it takes," he promised. "I am not ready to lose you, Olivia. I am not ready to go. We have too much living left to do." She held on through that winter and into the spring. The doctors said it was sheer willpower keeping her going, and Gideon knew they were right. Olivia had always been a fighter. On a warm day in May of 1913, the family gathered for Sunday dinner as always. Olivia insisted on being dressed and brought to the main house, though she was weak enough that Thomas had to carry her from the wagon. She sat in a chair by the window, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the family now extending to its 4th generation. "This is what heaven looks like," she said to Gideon when there was a quiet moment. "Being surrounded by everyone we love, everyone we created together." "It is pretty perfect," he agreed. That night, Olivia died peacefully in her sleep with Gideon holding her hand. She was 72 years old, and she left behind a family that stretched across Wyoming and Colorado, a ranch that bore her mark in every fence post and building, and a husband who had loved her devotedly for 43 years. Gideon grieved deeply, but without bitterness. He had been blessed with decades with the woman he loved, and they had built something beautiful together. Olivia was buried in the cemetery at the Laramie Church next to Thomas and Martha Barrett, bringing together in death the family that had been separated by tragedy in life. After Olivia's death, Gideon moved into a room in the main house where Thomas and Elizabeth could look after him. He was quieter now, spending long hours sitting on the porch or walking slowly around the ranch, remembering. The family worried about him, but he assured them he was all right. "I am not sad exactly," he told Grace one afternoon when she came to visit. "I miss your mother terribly, but I am also grateful. We had a good life together, better than most people ever get. She gave me everything I never knew I wanted. She would say the same about you, Papa. I hope so. I tried to make her happy." "You did. Anyone could see how much you loved each other." Gideon lived for 3 more years after Olivia's death, remaining active and engaged with the family and ranch despite his advancing age. He taught his grandchildren to ride and rope, told them stories about the early days, made sure they understood the history of the Walsh Ranch and how it came to be. On a cold November day in 1916, Gideon asked Thomas to take him out to the old line shack one more time. They rode slowly, Gideon bundled in heavy coats against the chill. When they reached the shack, now barely more than a pile of rotting logs, Gideon dismounted with Thomas's help and stood looking at it. "This is where I found her," he said, "right out there in the snow, barely alive. I thought I was just saving a stranger. I did not know I was finding the love of my life. She was lucky you came along when you did. I was the lucky one. She gave me 43 years of happiness and a family I never dreamed I could have." Not bad for a ranch hand who expected to die alone in a bunkhouse somewhere. They stood together in silence for a while, then Gideon nodded. "All right, I am ready to go home now." That night, Gideon died in his sleep, peacefully and without pain. He was 75 years old, and he left behind 5 children, 14 grandchildren, and 8 great-grandchildren. The ranch he and Olivia had built from nothing now stretched across 1,500 acres and ran more than 800 head of cattle and 200 horses. The Walsh name was respected throughout Wyoming as honest ranchers who treated their workers fairly and always kept their word. Gideon was buried next to Olivia in the Laramie Cemetery. The entire community turned out for his funeral, and there were so many people that they spilled out of the church and into the street. Pastor Reynolds, who had married them and buried Olivia and now buried Gideon, spoke about the love story that had sustained them through decades of hardship and joy. Gideon Walsh found Olivia Barrett in a blizzard, the pastor said in his eulogy. He built her a fire to save her life. But then he did something even more remarkable. He built her a home, a family, a life worth living, and she did the same for him. Together, they created something that will last for generations. That is the legacy of true love. After the funeral, the family gathered at the ranch. Thomas stood by the fireplace in the main house, the same place his father had stood so many times, and raised a glass. "To Gideon and Olivia Walsh," he said, "who taught us that love can survive anything, even a blizzard, who showed us that home is not just a place but the people you build it with, who gave us this family and this ranch, and the knowledge that we come from strong stock. May we honor their memory by living with the same courage and devotion they showed every day of their lives together." "To Gideon and Olivia," the family echoed, and they drank together, surrounded by the home that love had built. The Walsh Ranch continued to thrive under Thomas and Grace's management, passing eventually to their children and then their grandchildren. The family stayed close, gathering every year on Gideon and Olivia's anniversary to tell the story of the blizzard, the line shack, the fire, and the love that grew from a moment of desperate need into a lifetime of partnership. The original cabin where Gideon and Olivia had first lived remained standing, carefully maintained by each generation as a reminder of humble beginnings. The line shack eventually collapsed completely, but a marker was placed on the site with a simple inscription. "Here, a man found a woman in a storm. Here they found each other. Here, a family began." And that was the truth of it. From tragedy and near death had come life abundant, a family tree that spread wide and strong across the West. All because a cowboy had ridden through a blizzard and found a woman who needed saving, then discovered that she saved him right back. All because he built her a fire when she was dying of cold, then spent the rest of his life making sure she stayed warm, safe, and loved. It was, the family would say for generations to come, the greatest love story Wyoming had ever known. Not because it was dramatic or full of grand gestures, but because it was real and lasting and built on a foundation of mutual respect, devotion, and the simple act of one person choosing to help another in their darkest moment. That choice, made in a blizzard on a forgotten day in 1870, echoed forward through time, touching lives that would not exist without it, building a legacy that proved love could indeed conquer all, even death, because the love of Gideon and Olivia Walsh lived on in every child who bore their name, every grandchild who heard their story, every family gathering that celebrated what they had built together. They had started with nothing but each other and turned it into everything that mattered. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask from a life well lived and a love well tended. The fire Gideon built for Olivia in that line shack had never truly gone out. It still burned in the hearts of their descendants, warming them against whatever storms life might bring, reminding them that love and devotion could build a home that would stand forever.